Okay. Welcome back to Myth Vision Podcast. I'm your host, Eric Lambert. I hope you're having a wonderful holidays. Merry Christmas to everybody. I have been for years now with Myth Vision, talking to, learning from, diving deep into what scholarship says, mainly critical scholarship, about the Bible. And one of those topics is the resurrection of Jesus. And so, what I've ended up doing in recent days, without getting into all the nuts and bolts, is kind of engaging with some of the apologetic claims that we hear out there. And one of the things I notice about apologetics is it's a confidence building rhetoric. We're going to make you feel like this is absolutely certain. I don't want Myth Vision to be the takeaway of you can't believe in things. Who am I? I'm a primate on a planet, on a rock, floating through space, trying to make sense of the world. We all have things we like that we want to believe. But can we be factual with the data and then reconcile our beliefs based on what seems to be the case? This is kind of my agenda, if you will. Yes, I have a chip on my shoulder. I came out of fundamentalism. Forgive me in advance. It'll take me years to fully process going and coming out of this kind of world that I was once in that I really was traumatized by. But I'm truly about what the evidence seems to suggest. And so I've invited today Dr. James D. Tabor to discuss the ending of Mark, its abrupt ending. What is it doing? What kind of resurrection did Paul and Mark believe in? Because typically the view is, and the Orthodox view is, Jesus rose in the exact same body, flesh and blood, this exact same body. Like if I died and went into a grave 4 days later, I came back with this exact same body, is the idea. And that might be contended today. So without further ado, let's introduce our guest, Dr. James D. Tabor. Welcome back to Myth Vision, my friend.
Hey, Derek. Good to be with you. Looking forward to it. So
yeah, you're going to be on a roll here in just a moment. So the question is, did Paul, did Mark believe in a physical, and I used physical because that's the most common term, and as you and I both know, that could be a little tricky on what we mean by physical, but in the exact same body, Jesus rose from the dead in flesh and blood, flesh and bone body, this kind of idea. Did they believe that?
Yeah, I'm glad you added, did they believe it? Because we're really talking about what were the earliest beliefs of the Jesus movement. I think we could agree Jesus was crucified. I would say, based on our earliest testimony, that he was buried. That comes from the Apostle Paul, who's our earliest witness. Excuse me. And so we want to talk about what the chain of evidence is, not really to prove or disprove resurrection, but to do a kind of historical, critical view of the sources and what they say. And that's often what isn't done. All the sources are just like a deck of cards, particularly the New Testament. You kind of shuffle them around, go to this one, that one, the other one. Often Easter sermons, we're at Christmas, but Easter's coming around the corner. People just kind of choose their favorites. They even did that for Christmas. I sort of like Luke. He's got the shepherds watching in the fields. Well, I like Matthew with the wise men. Let's just put it all together. So let me give you a definition of critical. You and I have talked about before, but I think it's very important. Critical means careful. Okay. It doesn't mean to tear down. It doesn't mean to destroy. It doesn't mean to obliterate. That's how it's understood. Now, I've taught at 3 major universities for 43 years. There you go. So a lot of experience teaching gospel materials. The first place I taught was the University of Notre Dame, a Catholic university. Can you imagine? I'm getting fairly conservative Catholic students going to the West Point of the church, to get an undergrad education.
Right.
And I'm teaching this stuff, but I'm teaching it in a way that was engaging to them because I said, just everybody relax. Let's read text carefully and see what we come up with. And I did that same thing at the College of William and Mary, good undergraduate school, and then for over 3 decades at UNC Charlotte, from which I retired a couple of years ago. So just remember that, Derek, we're going to be talking about careful reading of the sources. And to me, that's being respectful of the original authors. In other words, if Mark says something and Matthew says something else, I don't want to conflate that because I want to read Mark as Mark. You know, I have a course on Mark. I think you're going to mention that later. And we try to read Mark as Mark. And when we look at this particular question of resurrection faith, this center pillar of most Christians as they talk about the faith, that Jesus died for our sins, that he was buried, that he was raised the third day. 1 Corinthians 15, right out of Paul's letter. What does that really mean, and what are the sources? So I want to recommend an article I wrote. It's easy to find, and we're going to talk about that in just a minute, but it's an article on why Christians are confused about, or actually, let me rephrase that. I think I put why people are confused, not just Christians, about the earliest accounts of Jesus's resurrection. And we're going to give you a link to that that's real easy to remember in a minute. But I want to start with an evangelical scholar who sadly passed away a few years ago, because I know people tune in with all kinds of interests and motivations to hear your very catchy title, physical or spiritual.
Right.
And I'm talking about Dr. Michael Heiser. I think he's one of the most respected evangelicals. Here's what he said when he read my essay, Why Are People Confused About the Early Christian View of Resurrection? So I'm going to read it to you. I have an endorsement from Michael Heiser for the method that I'm using. It doesn't mean you have to agree with my personal conclusions or what I think about resurrection. I need to take a drink of coffee here, Derek. Clear my voice. So here's what he said, and I love Michael for writing this. I want readers to know up front that Tabor's post is quite good. Now, we're going to talk about that post. You'll be able to read it, but hold on now. This is not the post. This is Michael. Stimulating, thoughtful, ironic in tone. That's Tabor, right? I'm peaceful. Just plain old good stuff for those who really enjoy reading biblical studies scholarship. For those unfamiliar with James Tabor, he's a New Testament scholar, part of the team that's been promoting the Talpiot tomb discoveries and so forth. He believes Talpiot tomb A contained the bones of Jesus and so forth. But look, let's go on down. But the gist of his article is that ancient Jews and Christians conceived of the resurrection as a reconstitution of the dead body in a new person, not a raising of the dead body, making the old body irrelevant. Hence, he does not see his view that Jesus' body was not raised on the third day as a repudiation of the idea of resurrection, and even a physical resurrection at that. Although I think his articulation of this view, as it involves a rejection of the more common view, that would be the view of the apologists you're talking about, suffers from some coherence problems, and he goes on to discuss that, and I respond to him on his blog. You can read it. I would not want anyone to pass on reading his essay. How about that? Readers should digest Tabor's article first before proceeding. So I just wanted to start with that, because a lot of times this is set up as a debate, as a battle. Oh, Tabor made a point, and so-and-so made a counterpoint, and wow, that was really strong. Wow, what a response that was. And I know that goes on YouTube, and it does have its place. Bart Ehrman, one of my friends in the academy, he's debated a lot of people. I generally am not big on debates because I see them as more just, scoring points in the audience, kind of like an arena. I think of it as the Colosseum, watching, the gladiators duel or something. I'd just rather have a analytical discussion, just like I would do in my courses when I teach, laying it all out, trying to look at the facts. So I've got next another page I want to put up. I wanted us to look at some texts and talk about what might have been the earliest Christian view, or if you don't want to use the word Christian, the earliest view of Jesus's resurrection. So make that a little larger, maybe, if that's okay.
Yeah, I can.
And kind of center it where people can see it. Now, let's start with the earliest record that we have in the New Testament Gospels. And this is the ending of Mark. I think we should talk about that. Now, as I go through, I'm going to try to say just the facts, please. Okay?
Okay.
So I know there are other endings of Mark, and we're going to talk about that. But this is the ending in our earliest manuscripts, the two dominant manuscripts. And this is not about the ending of Mark. I just want us to read this ending because I think it makes more sense than one might think. And in my Mark course with Myth Vision podcast courses, we thoroughly go into that. So let's take a look at it. When the Sabbath was past, Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of James, I think that's Mary, mother of Jesus also, but that's beside the point, and Salome bought spices so they might go and anoint him. And very early on the first day of the week, they went to the tomb when the sun had risen. And they were saying to one another, "Who will roll away the stone for us from the door of the tomb?" And looking up, they saw that the stone was rolled back. It was very large. So when they got there, it's open. And they entered the tomb and they saw, notice, a young man sitting on the right side of the tomb, dressed in a white robe, and they were amazed. So there's somebody else in the tomb. And he said to them, and notice, it's not an angel coming down from heaven, right? It's a young human, a man.
Right.
Don't be amazed. You seek Jesus of Nazareth, who was crucified. He is risen. He's not here. See the place where they laid him. But go tell his disciples and Peter that he is going before you to Galilee. There you will see him as he told you. And that's Mark 14:28. Earlier in Mark, Jesus said, "And when I am lifted up," or raised, "I will go before you to Galilee." Okay? And they went out and fled from the tomb, and trembling and astonishment had come upon them. And they said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid, period. Now, that's not a satisfactory ending once you read Matthew, Luke, and John, and other endings that have survived in even later apocryphal gospels and so on. It's not satisfying to anyone who reads it today because they don't understand the literary purposes of Mark. Mm-hmm. So could I just say, taking this Greek text, this earliest gospel record we have of the resurrection of Jesus, there are no appearances. They don't see the body. They don't touch it. They don't eat with him. They don't say, "Oh, are you a ghost?" "No, you're flesh and bones. Wow, you're real. You're really here." Now that does come later, but Mark doesn't have that. So what I want to say is let Mark be Mark. Read Mark's story as it is. Now, a couple of things about the Greek here. He has risen. He is not here. See the place where they laid him. Sounds like, when you read it, oh, he's risen from the dead and now he's going to appear to all these people, right? But notice, if you look at the Greek word, and I put the Greek up here, Greek is kind of hard to read, but I'll pronounce it for you. Agero is the verb. This is the aorist passive. Don't worry about aorist, but you know what passive voice means? Causation. He has been lifted up. He's been lifted up. Now, that could be understood in many texts, as we're going to see, as he's ascended to heaven, that his spirit body has ascended to heaven. or even that his physical body has been transposed to spirit and gone to heaven. Now, that verb is used earlier in Mark 2, if you'll go on down. And this is important because it just shows how common this is. This is the story, Derek, you'll remember, about the paralyzed man laying on a pallet, remember?
Yes.
And Jesus forgives his sins, and people object. How can you forgive sins? Only God can do that. And he says, oh, well, you don't like that? Maybe I'll just tell him to rise and take up his pallet and go home. How about that? And notice he did. He says, I say to you, to this paralyzed man, take up your pallet and go home. And notice, he rose, literally was lifted up. We would say he got up. And it's the same word. It's actually the same verb form, aorist passive. And immediately took up his pallet and went out before them. So you see there, it just means that you've been taken up. I picture Jesus grabbing his hand and kind of saying, rise, take up your pallet. So he's been lifted up, you see.
In a way, it has kind of, correct me if I'm wrong, almost like an ascension idea. Like it's
like passive. He's been lifted up. He's been right. It's what Paul says. God raised Jesus from the dead. Romans 1. Remember, he raised him in power from the dead. That was so. The idea of Jesus being lifted up. When you say resurrected, it could buy into a lot of other connotations. Resurrect is anastasis. It means to stand up. But it's used many times for the dead. And if you make the dead stand because they're lying down, you then have to say, well, in what kind of a body do they stand, right? That would be the question we'll get to with Paul. Now, notice another source, go on down, Gospel of Peter. Go on down to the next one. The Gospel of Peter was found in the 19th century in Egypt. It's a very interesting text. I think, and it's based very much in keeping or in harmony, I think, primarily with the Gospel of Mark, particularly in this section. This is right at the end. Unfortunately, Derek, it breaks off. Oh. Boy, I wish we had the rest of it, because I think I know what it would say. So anyway, the young man's in the tomb. I didn't quote it all here for space. It's the same account as Mark. There's a young man in the tomb sitting there. The stone's been rolled away. And notice, he is risen and gone away from whence he was sent. Now there in the Gospel of Peter, he's reading Mark, interpreting like you just suggested. He's gone to heaven. He's gone away from whence he was sent.
He was sent from heaven.
Gospel of Peter believes. So that's at the tomb. So you see, the Gospel of Peter, earliest, I want to almost say, retelling of Mark. This is from the 2nd century, we think. We're not sure, but it's pretty early. You can tell it's early as we go on and read. You're going to really think it's early. This writer, I don't know that it's Peter, but it's called the Gospel of Peter. I don't think it's Peter literally, and that doesn't matter. But it's an interpretation of Mark. Notice, he doesn't want you to think, oh, he's been lifted up. No, he's been lifted up and gone away from whence he was sent. He's gone to heaven. So when Mark says, I'll see you in the Galilee, right? We're going to read on here. Then the woman fled frightened. There's Mark right at the end. See, now he's going to tell you the rest. This would be his lost ending of Mark, right? I'm not saying this is Mark, but you see where he ended with Mark?
Yeah. The women were afraid and told no one.
Another ending of Mark in a certain way, in terms of the Mark tradition, okay? Now, this is going to blow you away. You've got to know about the Passover. When I dealt with Waco, remember Waco, 1993, David Koresh? He said, I'll come out after Passover. The FBI thought, hey, Passover was last night. He's not coming out. Passover is 8 days, okay? It's the day of Passover and then the 7 days of unleavened bread. So we jump ahead in verse 58. No gap. Now it was the final day of unleavened bread, and many went out returning to their homes since the feast was over. Have you ever thought about that? For 7 days, they're still keeping the Passover feast, just as Jews do to this day. Ask any Jewish friend of yours, how long does the Passover festival last? That person will tell you, well, there's the meal on the day of Passover and then the 7 days of unleavened bread. So people are going home. Now, what have the disciples been doing? But we 12 disciples of the Lord were weeping and sorrowful, and each one sorrowful because of what had come to pass, departed to his home. Now, they're from the Galilee. That means they went back to the Galilee. Okay? So for 7 days in this early source, appended to Mark's kind of ending, I'm not saying this is Mark. Again, I want to make clear. Peter is not a rewriting of Mark, but he's got Mark's ending. The women fled frightened. And then what? Well, then you have 7 days of unleavened bread. Why are they weeping and sorrowful for that whole week? If they've been meeting with him, hanging out with him, eating meals with him, touching him, holding him, you see?
Yeah. Meaning for the audience, just so the audience understands, you're saying like the way that it's portrayed in Matthew even, but mainly Luke and John.
Yeah.
Like right out the gate, he's hanging out with this resurrected
Absolutely.
physical Jesus in those stories. Whereas here, they are in distraught during Passover. They go
For
back
7 days.
head down, kind of in shame and upset over what happened.
And that's actually what Mark implies. I will see you in the Galilee, as I said. It's going to be in the Galilee. I will go before you to the Galilee.
Right.
So it's in the Galilee where people started having visions, whatever you want to call them, visions of Jesus. Now, notice verse 60, it's important. But I, Simon Peter, my brother Andrew, having taken our nets, went off to the sea. You know, I'm going fishing again. And Levi of Alphaeus, whom the Lord, blah, blah, blah. I don't want to say blah, 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 but break, and then it breaks off. Okay. Now, go back to the top of the page again. Now that you've seen that, I want to point something out. If you go all the way to the top, all the way, going up there, New Testament. I made this link for you guys just today. Okay, it will work. It will take you to the article. See right there? Why people are confused about the earliest Christian view of resurrection. To get my full reasoning, you've got to go read this. That's why I started with Michael Heiser. What did Michael Heiser tell everybody who might be interested in this? Don't skip reading Tabor. I have my disagreements, but this is a peaceful, right, ironic, worthwhile consideration that we all, and he's an evangelical Christian, should take into account. Okay, so go back to the document, if you will. Yeah, I didn't necessarily intend you to click on it, but it doesn't matter.
You're good.
But I want everybody to see that because, you know, these URLs are impossible. JamesTabor.com/Jesus Resurrection. Write it down.
I shared it in the comment section. I'm adding it to the description.
We'll put it in. Because I'm telling you, it's going to blow you away because I give all the details. Now we're just giving a summary. Okay, let's go back to where we were.
All right.
Go on down. No.
We went a little far.
Wait. There was a little bit at the bottom, I believe. Yeah, right here.
There we go.
Now, what is Mark's view of Jesus' resurrection? Because it's very cryptic. Remember, Mark has the secret of his gospel, the secret of the kingdom. So here it is, Mark 9:1. We're going back to the middle of Mark, chapter 9. It has 16 chapters. And he said to them, truly I say to you, there are some standing here who will not taste death till they've seen the kingdom of God has come with power. Now, in the Transfiguration account, I think I might have put it on the next page. Go on ahead, and I can't remember if I did or not. No, I didn't. So I'll just remind you of it. You can go look it up. Mark 9:1. I didn't want to put too much reading on. If you'll look that up, what happens?
You want me to find that?
No, it's okay.
Okay.
Well, if you want to. You want to go do it?
What, go to Mark 9?
Nah, let me just because it's not as important as what I want to do next with Peter. So what Mark 9:1 says is he's talking to the 12, and Jesus has just been confessed as the Christ by Peter, even though Peter didn't understand the suffering. And he says, look, some of you are not going to die before you see the kingdom come with power. Okay, then he takes them up on the mountain where they are, okay, and they see what's called the Transfiguration. I think Bible readers will remember that. What it means is the transformation, the metamorphosis of Jesus. So he becomes this glorious heavenly being, and with him are Moses and Elijah. Now it's a vision, because at the end it poofs away, and suddenly they just see the regular Jesus. But it's not all the disciples, it's the select group, Peter, James, and John, and I think Andrew's included here, as I recall. So notice, some of you are going to get a taste of what the kingdom of God is when it comes. And what do they see? They see a heavenly glorified Jesus. So that's Mark's resurrection. It's proleptic. Proleptic means he's already given you a glimpse of it by letting you go on the mountain with the disciples, the chosen group, the 3 or 4 that went, and they get to see the secret. The rest don't get to see this. The Transfiguration in Mark 9 is what Mark thinks happened to Jesus at the empty tomb. He was glorified, he was transfigured, he was taken up to heaven. We've seen that. Now, here's the earliest interpretation of the Transfiguration in 2 Peter. I want you to notice this. This is the earliest interpretation. And notice he calls it the power and coming of our Lord Jesus. He says, we did not follow cleverly devised myths when we made known to you the power and coming of our Lord Jesus, but we were eyewitnesses of his majesty. Majesty means enthroned in heaven, right? To sit at the right hand of God. So they saw a proleptic, a glimpse ahead of time. I don't think Peter wrote 2 Peter, but the author of 2 Peter has Mark 9 in mind. Do you see that very clearly? He goes on to tell you exactly. For when he received honor and glory from God the Father, that's at the resurrection, right? He receives honor and glory at the right hand of God. And the voice was born, this is my beloved Son in whom I'm well pleased. We heard this voice born from heaven, for we were with him on the holy mountain. So there's a holy mountain in Galilee. Matthew knows about it, right? We're going to get to Matthew. He knows about it. In the Galilee, where resurrection faith was born. But what kind of faith was born? Was it the faith of Jesus running around Jerusalem for a week, touching and tasting and eating meals and showing his physical body? I'm talking about the earliest view. Mark's view is that some of them saw ahead of time on a holy mountain the glorified Jesus as he would be when he was raised from the dead. And this text in 2 Peter is remembering that experience and calling it holy, and talking about that's how we know that Jesus is not just a cunningly, cleverly devised myth. You see? He's saying it was a real experience. We saw the power and glory of Jesus on the holy mountain. Okay, go ahead. You can scroll on down. Now, if you take this, people weren't happy with Mark's ending. Believe me, they were not happy. Now, if you take 2 Peter and you take the Gospel of Peter, 2 Petrine traditions here that are agreeing, you should be perfectly happy with it, because Jesus was transformed into heavenly glory and sat at the right hand of God, and the physical body literally doesn't matter. Mark does seem to think the physical body just kind of dissolved and disappeared. At least the tomb is empty. Paul talks later, and we'll talk about this, the Apostle Paul, he says when you die, you leave the body like old clothing, then you're naked. This is 2 Corinthians 5, and then you're reclothed with the new body, okay? So the naked state is kind of like what people would call the soul, right? But you don't carry around your old clothes. And that's the thing that these early witnesses are not worried about. They're not worried about old rotted clothing, the human body that's mortal and corruptible and of death and of dust that goes back to the dust. Okay, now let's look at this longer ending. I do this with my students, and every one of them gets it. I don't do it until towards the end of the course.
Right.
If you read this ending, I'm going to call it this bogus ending. I'm sorry, I don't want to offend anybody. I think this destroys Mark. Do you see what Mark is trying to do? He's not making it easy on you. When the women flee and they're afraid and they don't witness to anyone and they say nothing to anyone, do you really think the next verse said, now when he was risen early on the first day of the week, he appeared first to Mary Magdalene? That sounds like a summary or something. Notice it doesn't even give the encounter. I'm going to now tell you what really happened after the women fled. It's tacked on. As you read it, the style of it, it just rings to anyone who has a sense of these kind of concocted texts that someone has cobbled this together. Now, where did they cobble it from? What they did is they took a little bit of Matthew. Look, first of all, casting out 7 demons, that's only in Luke. So you said, well, Mark could have known that. Yeah, he did know it. Whoever wrote this ending knew Luke, so they put that in. Mary Magdalene, you know, the one who cast out 7 demons. You see what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And what does Matthew have in Matthew's last chapter, 28? He appeared first to Mary Magdalene. You see?
Yeah.
Okay, so what's happening? If my students can do this, the rest of you can do it. And she went and told them what had been that had been with him, and they mourned and wept. Okay, they mourned and wept, but this is Sunday morning. Doesn't say they mourned and wept for 7 days. And they then, when they heard that he was alive and had been seen of her, didn't believe. After these things, he was manifested in another form to 2 of them as they walked on their way into the country.
Luke.
And as they went away and told it to the rest, they neither believed. Afterwards, he was manifested unto the 11 as they sat at table, and he upbraided them for their unbelief. Luke 24. And then he said, go into all the world and preach the gospel and baptize. Matthew again. Yep. See what's happening?
Yeah.
But please notice verse 19. And that's the verse that Irenaeus quotes, that everybody goes to. It says, oh, no, the ending was there. The ending was there. He quotes verse 19. But look at verse 19. Now, by the way, this is not in the Greek copies of Irenaeus. It's in the Latin. But I don't care if it's in the Latin. I don't even care if it was in the Greek, because what does it say? It's Mark. So then the Lord Jesus, after he'd spoken unto them, forget that part because he didn't say anything, was received into heaven and sat down at the right hand of God. That's Mark's view. So you see what they're doing? Mark's view is at the end, and all the rest is cobbled from Matthew and Luke and possibly hinting at
the ending of John.
Maybe John. Let me just see if there's
at least the gospel Peter you showed did, because Peter
has both, going up back to the Galilee.
Right.
So this would just be I don't think whoever put this together doesn't go into the Galilee appearances. I think they would be afraid that would confuse people. Well, it would confuse people because according to Mark, resurrection faith was born in the Galilee after Jesus ascended to heaven and was glorified, as 2 Peter said, appeared in his majestic glory. That's the glory of a king sitting on a throne. Now, I'm telling you, I don't understand how people read this and they're so impressed with it. And they talk as if, oh, how this is such a wonderful ending. I don't want this in Mark. because I don't think Mark wrote it. And I'll tell you this, I think it's incredibly disrespectful of Mark's integrity to cobble this on the end when he would have said, what? I didn't end it like that. I ended it with the mystery where you've got to go figure out what happened. And what's your clue? He will see you in the Galilee. And how's he going to see you in the Galilee? Mark 9:1. That was the pre-resurrection experience. And as my teacher, Norman Perrin, used to say at the University of Chicago, who knew more about Mark than anyone I've ever studied with, he said, Mark 9:1 is Mark's resurrection account ahead of time. And he's hinting to you, the reader, of course, Mark believes Jesus was taken to heaven. And so does the Gospel of Peter.
I mean, can I just interject here?
Sure,
This is a very powerful point here, James. So we have this tradition about a transfiguration that is central to all these Gospels. I mean, very important. What does it picture? Jesus on a high mountain, like practically in the heavens, toward the clouds, almost ascending, if you will, and next to him is the law and the prophets, symbolized by Moses and Elijah. I don't want to get caught in those details, just to make the point, though. He is taken up. The vision is Jesus is taken up, and he is being ascending, if you will. It's kind of a proto-ascension narrative. And
yes.
So what we see here in this resurrection narrative, according to what you're suggesting Mark is saying, is, hey, I'll see you in the Galilee. You guys had this vision. Look, I am being taken up. So when he is resurrected, I know the term can be understood, and most apologists want to die on the hill of what Luke and John are saying about, man, he came back in the same body and he was like fill my flesh and like give me that fish sandwich, Peter. Watch this. I'm really the same guy in the same body. They want to die on that hill. But the point initially in Mark is that he is deified. This is a God man who is now in the heavens. He has been taken up and ascended. It's not about this earthly existence in the same flesh. Somehow that theology creeps in.
Where we'll talk about why. We know why it creeped in. Yeah.
Okay.
And by the way, Matthew knows this too, because he has them on the holy mountain in Matthew.
Oh, this is good.
And the 11, and what? Some doubted. So he knows that some saw, some didn't see. He's heard the tradition that, well, everybody wasn't convinced. And this is of the 11 apostles. So you see what's happening, but he doesn't have any eating, any physical appearances. You see?
And just to ask you for clarification, when you brought up the Gospel of Peter, you're not like dying on a hill necessarily, but do you think there's a memory there, in the sense that, are you inclined to think that them mourning during the entire 8 days is it's more historically possibly relying on a memory that early on when he died, there was no Sunday celebration, he's resurrected kind of idea, but rather these guys, he's dead. And at some point, maybe even after the 8 days, you would probably try to say maybe they had an experience, or someone among the group had an experience, and then it started to circulate that people were having, oh, Jesus is risen because so-and-so said they saw them or something. I don't know. I'm just thinking.
They were visionary experiences. And when we get to Paul, we're going to go to Paul and just talk about that. Okay. And you'll see that Paul is our earliest witness. You know, the letters of Paul from the 50s. The Gospels are after 70, at least I think they are. But before we go there, yeah, exactly, Derek, you're right on that. I think you're correct on that. I would say resurrection faith was born in the Galilee. That's where it was born. Now, we're going to get to Luke and Matthew. I'm not going to go through them all because you got this article and you got the link to it where I go through every bit of it, how they get embellished. Matthew starts saying, oh, there was an angel. He was mighty. There were soldiers there, and the tomb was sealed, and they fell over dead, and on and on and on. And then Luke also has all of his additions. And then John has a whole chapter about the Galilee appearance. But before that, he's got, for the week when they're supposed to be mourning and crying, Jesus is appearing to them. Doubting Thomas shows up and so forth. I loved your little thumbnail for this show. But before we go, let's see what else people did to Mark because they're not happy with it.
Okay.
Because we got up to 9 endings, but we're just going to do a 5. Now, does this sound real to you? Does this sound real? Oh, I'm not even going to talk about the manuscript. If I just read right after, and the women fled and were afraid and said nothing to anyone, period. And they reported all the instructions briefly to Peter's companions. Sorry to laugh, folks, but come on. What world are we living in? Afterwards, Jesus himself, through them, sent forth from east to west the sacred and imperishable proclamation of eternal salvation. And then you even add, amen. Notice the longer ending of Mark, amen. What are you putting amen at the end? What is this, like a prayer? Now, then we've got in the Friarologion Codex, and they excuse themselves saying, what? Who are we talking about here? This age of lawlessness and unbelief is under Satan that has not allowed the truth and power of God to prevail. I can't even read this. Come on. You read it. For those who sin, I was handed over to death that they might return to truth. This is Jesus talking, I guess. Or they might hear. Okay, and then finally, and they reported brief. Oh, they fled and said nothing to anyone. Period. But they reported briefly to Peter and those with him, and all that had been told. After this, Jesus appeared and sent out by means of them from east to west. So that's kind of like the other one. Look, I love the ending of Mark. I think it has such power for Mark as Mark.
Yeah.
And I feel it's disrespectful to the gospel text. If you're going to respect the gospel text, let Mark be Mark, let Matthew be Matthew, Luke be Luke, and John be John, but don't cobble them together and make up some ending that changes Mark, okay?
Wow. Okay.
Now let's talk about Paul, because I've got a course on Paul.
Yes, you do. Let me first, okay, this is a moment. Allow me, please, to just introduce it to people.
Okay, but I don't want people to leave, because wait till you hear what Paul says about resurrection, and it's going to fit with Mark like you will not believe.
Shameless plug. Look, fair warning, bear with me for 1 second. MVP-courses.com, the queen of myth vision, Ryan Lambert, runs that, and she works with these academics.
Wow, that looks pretty impressive.
Yeah, we have a lot of academics with a lot of courses. We have 3 by you, James, right now, and we've got more to come in the future. I will say this, amongst all of our academics, you are the most active with your students, doing Zoom calls like every single month. You are doing Zoom meetings and hanging out and taking questions and answering questions. And
I like that. I like doing that. I volunteer to do that. It's not even something that Derek has said, oh, would you please do? You know, he's not going to ask that of my time, but
I've never asked it of any academic. Actually.
I love my students. I want to work with them. And it's not a webinar where you listen to me give some more lectures. No, we're together in the room. You see my face. I see your faces if you want to turn your camera on. And we've had as many as 200 people. Usually it's not that many because we also record it. A lot of times people can't make that specific live thing. But the ones that do make it get to raise their hands, talk, get into things, discuss things. Yeah. You know, people always want to, well, how do I get hold of this or that scholar? And I know I could write an email, but people are busy. I want to talk about it. So
yeah, we're going to talk about Paul's version of resurrection. Just to point out, you do have the quest for the historical Paul, apostle or apostate. And then you have the Gospel of Mark, reading Mark as Mark. A ton of people signed up for that course. That was a really, really good one. And then also Jesus and the Dead Sea Scrolls, which there's so much overlap and interesting similarities and differences. And, you kind of ask yourself, is he in the vein of what we find in the Qumran communities, versions, if you will, of Christianity or, of Judaism in some way? I will say this, one compliment. I hope people will sign up for the course because you're not only helping Myth Vision grow, you're helping the academic for whichever course you sign up for to keep bringing more insights and giving public knowledge and having these interviews. And they'll also show up on other people's channels to promote the course, to bring their teachings public. But the one compliment I'd like to give you, James, is this. And, I can't think higher of you in the way that you engage and have these dialogues. You've been retired for years now, and while we were going through this particular course, we're going through all 7 letters, reading every sentence Paul says during it to take us through the 7 authentic. There were moments. This is something I love about you as an academic. You've done 40 something years. I'm just a student having fun in this playground of reading this stuff without a dogma attached to it, not without like, I must believe this. I can have so much fun with the Bible now. You pause and you look up at me while we're recording. We ended up cutting some of this stuff, but you're like, actually, oh my God, I think I'm going to go back with this older idea that I once held to, because this. And it's like watching you, someone who's read this for so long, be willing to mold your thinking to the evidence that makes the most sense to you, even today. It's hard to catch a scholar, in my view, personally, who doesn't have their mind made up so firm. They're so kind of dogmatic in what they have taught and learned for so long that they aren't willing to kind of adjust and mold to whatever the evidence seems to suggest, and listening to other academics too along the way. And so you have been a unique academic in that respect, and just want to give you that special praise, man, to say it's been an honor. So,
well, it's a privilege to me. Also the students that sign up, they have spent years in other careers. Often they're not professionally involved in this, usually the students that come, but they have studied and read considerably. And whether they have or not, I'm not saying every single student has, read dozens of books on Paul, but they come either from churches or from various kinds of background. Some hate Paul, by the way. They don't particularly like Paul. They think he sort of ruined Christianity. Others love Paul and depend on Paul. Doesn't matter. We're trying to get Paul right. We're trying to see, what does he say? What was his message? What was his mission? So it actually, one size fits all. If you just love Paul and you believe, boy, he was the last one to ever communicate with Jesus, that's what he claims. We study that. We study his claims. We're trying to get him right in terms of what he says in those original early letters. So I want everybody to know and feel comfortable with that. But people bring to this course a lot of knowledge and a lot of history. And that's why I enjoy it so much, because I'm not talking to a bunch of 20-year-olds usually. Please welcome all 20-year-olds.
Yeah.
No insult. But, when I taught undergrad for years, students probably looked at a little bit in Sunday school or whatever, but this was really their first time. And that's true for some who take the course. Others, though, have really studied Paul and they have strong feelings, but it doesn't matter. We're all together. Mm-hmm. And the next Zoom meeting, we're doing this live today, right? This is recorded. But
this is live right now. Yeah.
So guess what? Today's Friday, the 27th. 2 days from now at noon Eastern time, we're going to have our second Zoom meeting for this course. If you sign up between now and then, the link is in the course pack. I don't know if Ryan's put it up yet today, but she will today. And you'll see it. And I also send out an email invitation as a reminder Sunday morning. And I'm going to send out a basic invitation to people already in it today. So you've kind of tuned in at the right time. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to lead a discussion in the Sunday Zoom meeting coming up this Sunday, the 29th of December. Did Paul do away with the Torah or the law, as Luther and others have argued, as Christianity finally argued? Is that the case? And we're going to look at some of the main passages, and then we just open it up. People raise their hands, Q&A. And I want to make clear, the Q&A is not like, okay, question 1, I answer. Question 2, it's not like that. I don't do it like that. You get to talk. You get to ask your question. I come back at you. I say, yeah, John or Pete or Susan or Sally or whatever. That's a good point. I've thought that too. Now I've got some problems. It's like a discussion answer Q&A. That's just like you do in a classroom. Okay.
I love it.
Now you're going to put all those links in. I hope to see a bunch of people that are new.
Yeah, they're in the description, and I'll pin a comment if you're watching this later and you didn't catch this live. I'll pin the comment to have you go sign up for the Paul course. And he has 2 other courses, but he's doing Zooms right now for the Paul course. And we hope to do more in the future. If people sign up and this is something that they really enjoy, we'll keep doing these. I know that James really enjoys doing them. James, you're never going to retire, by the way. You're always going to, you're
Not
always going
planning
to
on it. Retread rather than retire, right?
right.
Yeah.
But so
No,
I guess
I'm busier than I was when I was teaching full time. But remember, I was chair of the department. I had many administrative duties. In some ways, my time is my own now. So that's the difference that I'm very excited about. So now I want to do something. We went over Mark and went over the Gospels. You got that article you can read on Jesus' resurrection that Michael Heiser praised. I'm just very proud of that because Michael and I had a simpatico. We understood each other and we came out at different ends, but I respect him. He respected me. So now let's switch to Paul, who is our earliest witness to the resurrection of Jesus, and ask the question that we're discussing today: in what kind of a body do they come? When people are raised from the dead, what kind of a body do they come forth in? Or in what kind of body are they embodied, to use a redundant expression? Because Paul answers that for us. Now, first of all, in 1 Corinthians 9.
You want me to pull this up, by the way?
No, don't pull it up because I just want to talk about it. It confuses people too much and we bog down. 1 Corinthians 9, Paul says, I've seen the Lord. And he likens it to the other apostles, James and Peter and the others. He names them, and the brothers of the Lord. He says, I've seen the Lord. Then in 1 Corinthians 15, he tells the Corinthians the resurrection is coming. He believes that it'll come in his lifetime. He talks about we will be changed when this happens. And he talks about the living being transformed. Now, those are the ones that go from a physical body and metamorphosize into a spiritual body, almost like the physical melts away. This is Paul's idea, right? He says, in the moment, in the blink of an eye, the living will be transformed into this new spiritual state, this new spirit being, really. And he says it'll be like Jesus. Okay. He says it'll be just like Jesus. So we don't have to actually debate this, Derek. He says Jesus, the first Adam and Eve in the garden, were of the dust. So Jesus was of the dust. He was a flesh and blood human being. The second Adam, that's Jesus transformed and glorified, is a life-giving spirit. And he has what is called a wind body, literally. We say a spiritual body. Spiritual doesn't really work as much as a spirit body. He's a spirit being, like an angel, in other words, in the mythology of this time or the views of this time. And then he explains it to you. As we were people of dust, we shall be transformed into this spiritual state in the blink of an eye, like that. And as I've already mentioned, in other letters, he explains, Philippians 3:20 and 21, he will change our lowly body to be like his glorious body. That's the living. But what about the dead? Because Jesus was dead in the tomb, right? He wasn't living, he was dead. Evangelicals agree strongly with that. He's not resuscitated, like they drugged him on the cross, some of those theories. No, he's dead. He's gone. But he says, as he died and was raised, so those who believe in him who've died will also be raised. And he likens it to putting off old clothing, being naked or asleep. Asleep is his word for it. And then waking up and being reclothed in this new body. Now, what happens is if somebody has recently died, you start thinking about the old body, right? That's why people have trouble. To really prove Jesus was raised and transformed into this glorious new body, wouldn't I need to have the old body somehow disappear Like, could you have resurrection faith and still have the bones of Jesus or the body of Jesus? I would say absolutely so, or no bones at all, because finally people go back to the dust, given enough time. And this is the view within the New Testament. For example, Revelation 20 pictures a final general resurrection, right? All the dead that have ever lived are raised up from the dead. And I could ask the question, and what kind of a body do they come? And that's not a Pauline text, but I think Paul would say a body like Jesus, a spirit body, not a physical body. He was raised a life-giving spirit, okay? That agrees with Mark. We just went over it. That agrees with all of these statements, like in the Gospel of Peter. He went back from whence he had come, right? So when you read Paul, you have to realize in the book of Revelation, if you just read it in context, those who died at sea in the oceans, are also raised. Now, at that point, we're not talking about a body anymore, are we really? Or even a tomb that's gone back to the dust. Paul is not into that kind of thing. He realizes that people go back to the dust. And if you're going to have a resurrection of people that lived centuries earlier, after all, in the Transfiguration, Moses and Elijah also appear in their resurrected bodies, right? We have to go find their bones somehow? Those bones would long ago be gone. So I think it's pretty clear that the earliest Christian view of resurrection faith was not a resuscitated corpse or physical body appearing for 7 days in Jerusalem and later in the Galilee and convincing them, touch me, let me eat with you. That's resurrection. That's not Paul's view of resurrection. Paul leaves us at the burial. Jesus died and was buried and was lifted up, right? And was seen. That's the biblical pattern. Died, buried, back to the dust, and then lifted up and was seen in the case of Jesus. And then he says, all who believe in him at his coming will also be raised up from the dead in these new bodies. So I think that is the earliest faith in resurrection. Now, what happened? Apologetics came in. Matthew and Luke and John are apologists. They're worried that people in the pagan, Greek, and Roman world are going to say, as Celsus said to Origen, not directly to Origen, but in effect, Origen refutes him and argues against him. Celsus is a Greco-Roman philosopher. And he said, well, you have these appearances, but how do you know they weren't ghosts? People claim to see all kinds of things. How do you know it wasn't an apparition or just some hallucination? And what happens is the Christians begin to come up with other stories in that interim period before he's taken to heaven. So now we add a time. Acts says 40 days, actually, right? And have you noticed in the book of Acts, chapter 1, I think it's verse 4, Jesus says, don't leave Jerusalem. Wait a minute. Don't leave Jerusalem?
He said, go to Galilee. What do you mean?
If they don't leave Jerusalem, how are they going to go to Galilee and see him as he said? But see, Luke, Acts doesn't have anything in the Galilee. Matthew does still have the Galilee tradition. I'm thankful for that. You know, he keeps a little bit of the early tradition. So clearly, Derek, the earliest tradition was he ascended to heaven in a glorified body, sits at the right hand of God, and then people had visions and sightings of Jesus, as Paul said. But Paul makes it clear, the body of dust is of no interest to God. Flesh and blood, he says, will not inherit the kingdom. And what is the kingdom? Remember Mark 9? You will see the kingdom come with power. A transfigured Jesus. Nothing to do with bodies, nothing to do with flesh and blood. So finding the bones of Jesus, finding a tomb of Jesus, and I start the article on my blog that everybody can read with that quote from a skeptical colleague of mine who said, how could you possibly believe if they had the tomb in the body that they could have had resurrection faith? A lot of my colleagues have raised that. Well, it's because you're not understanding the earliest Christian view of resurrection faith had nothing to do with graves or tombs being left behind. After all, the ocean is a pretty big tomb, right? And it doesn't matter if you died at sea. The dead come forth into this new state in the New Testament. So that's why Michael Heiser kind of stood back a little bit and said, whoa, well, maybe this is the earliest view. So what happens? Apologetics comes in just as it is today. Most of the apologists that argue for resurrection of the dead, right? We know who they are. William Lane Craig and Habermas and so forth. What do they say? Let's look at the evidence for the appearances. And they were either lying, deceived, or telling the truth. There are only three possibilities.
Liar,
and you would think they would lie and then be martyred for it. Well, first of all, none of those accounts are eyewitness. Paul's the only first-person account. You say, well, how do you know they're not eyewitness? Well, let me rephrase it. None of those accounts claim to be first-person eyewitness accounts. There's only one person in the New Testament who said, I have seen the Lord first person, meaning that person's writing and saying, I've seen the Lord. And you ask him, his name is Paul, what did you see? What kind of a body? And he said, well, it was spiritual. It was glorious. It was powerful. It was heavenly. It was a wind body. Okay. First person testimony. That's what he saw. So followers of Jesus later began to worry about that. This is after 70, I think. This is into the second century, late first century, early second century. And they began to come up with stories about actually experiencing the physical Jesus. So nobody could say it was just a ghost. And then they all are fine with later making it a spiritual body, right?
So there's a few things, a few comments, and then if we could dive into some other interesting aspects that I find interesting to parallel it to, and how we would rationalize that. The first thing is Matthew. We've talked about Matthew. Matthew, like, I feel is this weird, I'm trapped in between. I got to fix Mark. I got to do a little bit better than I think Mark did, because he didn't really like how Mark did what he did. And then at the end, they're on the Holy Mountain in Galilee. They are worshiping. It says they're all worshiping the Lord, which means they're somehow, according to this gospel, seeing him or experiencing him on this mountain. It says they worshiped him. Some doubted, or it implies that they doubted. And it's like
unbelievable that would be included in Matthew.
Yeah, I
can't believe a scribe didn't take it out long ago.
Yeah, how can you literally see him? This is the risen Lord physically in the body. Like you know he's dead, and you're over here doubting. Like, it just is so odd.
Well, Matthew thinks he's already been glorified for sure.
Yeah.
See, he does have he appeared to Mary Magdalene. In that bogus ending. He appeared to Mary Magdalene. Well, appeared. I mean, again, Celsus, the pagan critic, the Greek critic, says, hey, bunch of women hallucinating, that's not impressing me. Could have just been a ghost or their imagination, grief-stricken and so forth.
He was questioning their kind of like the trauma too of like what they were going through. He just died. Like, you're going to trust they're not losing their minds right now because they just saw their master be destroyed by the Romans. Like, how do you trust their testimony when they just went through this extremely distraught situation? And you're going to like say that if you take that at face value, and it seemed like Celsus read this material seriously and actually took in and thought through this and went, that's a huge red flag. Like, how do you trust that if this is what happened?
So that's Matthew. So Matthew sort of goes with Mark. He's aware of the Transfiguration. I think he understands that it's a vision. I think Matthew's the one who says, I think it's Matthew, tell no one the vision until I'm raised from the dead. Meaning, it's, again, I use the word proleptic. A lot of people don't use that, but to see before.
Mhm.
Matthew understands that. He understands enough of Mark to know that was the glorified, resurrected Jesus. And so he puts that in, you see. But
I was reading the Hermeneutic commentary yesterday or day before, just to kind of wrap my head around the ending of Mark. And it's interesting to find out, like, a lot of people try to get pushback. It wouldn't end on, for the women were afraid and told no one. And it would not end that way, they said. And then come to find out that in Mark, they're like getting into the grammar, of course, the Greek syntax and all that, and explaining that there's this phrase in Mark that continues to happen over and over. They're terrified, right? What happens on the Mount of Transfiguration? They're terrified.
right.
One brighter than the sun, and he's cowering before God. And then he says, go and tell no one. So you see this terrified theme connected with tell or don't tell. And like, you'll get this theme of like this trope within the gospel of saying go and tell or go and don't tell, or, like don't tell or tell. At the end of the gospel, it ends with, and they were terrified and they told no one. Just continuing the theme.
Mark wants, I cover this in the Mark course extensively, but Mark wants your last view of Jesus to be a dead Messiah on the cross. And there's where you say, truly, this was the Son of God. He doesn't want a celebratory resurrection Jesus that you would then, I think he believes Jesus was raised. Absolutely. The author of Mark thinks he was taken to heaven and glorified. But he doesn't want to leave you with that glorified view at the end, because then you're going to forget the suffering. And remember when he rebukes Peter, who says, oh, no, you're the one, you're the Christ.
Right.
We love the glory. We love, the power and so forth. Right. And Jesus said, get behind me, Satan. So Mark goes with that the whole time through. If you study Mark carefully, you'll see that ending is perfect for Mark. And you can see how those tacked on endings are just kind of silly. They said nothing to anyone, and then they went and told everybody.
And hallelujah, and the whole world knew him.
Well, that's what Mark doesn't want you to do.
Yeah.
He wants you to stand there, and your last view of Jesus is a Roman centurion declaring this was a Son of God, meaning the dead, suffering Jesus. And then he wants you to look in the mirror and say, would you like to follow him? Would you like to follow? There's the cross. That's Mark. Not, look what he did for you. Glory, hallelujah. He's raised from the dead. He has all power and glory. Look at Matthew. All power and glory in heaven and on earth is given to me. Mark would just cringe at that. Oh, this is what you want? Huh. Skipping the cross again, huh? And you'll see that, if you take the Mark course, we go through that. It's really a beautiful document. I actually honor it and treasure it. I've spent many years studying it, and I don't want it changed into something that scribes and copyists later felt, ooh, this isn't good. Well, they didn't understand it. God forgive them. They didn't understand it. They're just thinking this isn't going to support our Christian dogma that we've since developed over a couple hundred years.
Exactly.
So we better have these endings. Otherwise, people are going to read it and say, what? They didn't see him? So
that's a great point.
To me, it's so transparent. So let's read the text critically, meaning carefully, and let each one be what it is. So
I got one more to bring up. This is a unique position that I had not ran across till I read Dr. Richard C. Miller's work, Resurrection and Reception. He is in your backyard in the sense of that you guys are both in that Mediterranean, Greco-Roman background and seeing tropes and themes and elements. And he goes through 15 translation fables. One of the common tropes is that a body goes missing. So if you're writing a well-known fable or story or something that's powerful, you want the hero's body to go missing.
Yeah, Hercules is my favorite there. Remember?
Yeah.
He disappears during the night, and then somebody hears a voice from heaven and a light saying, I go before you now as a god or something, just like
yes.
And then they go look in his tent. Oh my God, it's empty. It's the empty tent, not the empty tomb.
Right.
So what
So
does
there's
Richard
several.
say? He says that just means he was metamorphosized into that or something.
Right. I would imagine, I mean, what is the metaphysics, right, of it? Like, I don't know if the ancients really had a dogma of the exact metaphysics. They believed they had a body, but physical flesh and blood, I doubt it was that kind of body.
Well, in the Romulus account, doesn't he the body kind of melts? You picture it like a rocket's going up, right? He ascends off of Mars Hill, remember?
Yeah, I don't
Romulus.
remember if it
And
melts.
then it says the body begins to dissolve as he's going up.
Yeah, I
And
don't remember. I
yeah,
really
and then
don't remember.
he becomes kind of a light being in heaven, a star. So
I know that he makes appearances, and this is what I was going to bring up about the eyewitness stuff that we read in First Corinthians and stuff. Dr. Miller brought it to my attention that when we read the Gospels, and it wasn't just him, others that have brought stuff like it, but he really made me think in a way I didn't think about this, was here you have tropes of eyewitness testimony that are often purposeful literary tactics of claiming eyewitness in the Gospel of John, these kinds of things. Luke, and what happens is we're glad to say, oh, well, the road to Emmaus is mythology. He appears, they don't recognize him. He's walking with them and talking with them. And this is like a weird theophany type myth where they show him hospitality. It's a well-known hospitality myth. They break bread with this guy, invite him into their home. And the next thing you know, they realize that was the epiphany, that manifestation that God appeared. He showed up to us. He's alive. And then they go tell the others. Well, that Roman road appearance stuff happened with the Caesars and with Romulus. And he says we should look at least, and this should be on the table. It's not even on the table in discussion amongst academics, that in Paul's letters, when they talk about the eyewitness stuff, why isn't the Roman road trope, the well-known established Hall of Fame trope that we see when a Roman emperor died, they became deified, ascended, like Mark's idea, not this walking around on earth stuff that Luke and John does, but a true taken to heaven, becoming a god and appearing to many after they have already become deified. They then have appearances, the Caesars, Romulus. Why aren't we taking that and saying, even you may not agree, you may take it as like they really were having visions. That's okay, because humans are superstitious anyway. But like, why aren't we granting the category that maybe the Roman imperial cult and Romulan type legends influenced Paul's idea of having these visions? And the development that we see of Roman roads or road experiences in the Gospels are indicative of this. This is why I find it so fascinating, because Richard Miller, can be misunderstood in saying, oh, it's strictly only made up and it's all concocted and fabricated. But he's much more nuanced in saying humans are superstitious, but tropes and legends are very powerful. They fit hand in glove. Why aren't we granting both and finding a way to merge this? Humans have cognitive, reasons to have visions potentially, but driven by that vehicle of Roman Caesars appeared to people. There were people swearing, I swear I saw the Caesar so-and-so on Roman roads. And so,
but at Augustus's, let's start with Augustus's funeral. The body's there. They're carrying the body.
Right.
And then one of the senators says that he saw a new star.
Right.
And swore that the soul, as people would say, or the glorified Caesar is now in heaven. But you have that, and that would not preclude then that glorified Caesar appearing physically in a vision to somebody the next day and saying, yeah, I was taken to heaven, but I just want to come and tell you, I had some final words for you. Be of good courage. And maybe he would appear to Tiberius and say, I'm really glad I chose you, or something. I'm just making that up.
Yeah.
But that wouldn't mean, oh my God, what, where's the body? So this body thing, people are hung up on this body thing. That the whole thing, just go back to Paul's question, but in what kind of a body do the dead come forth? Because he knows bodies decay and rot and finally disappear. In the case of Augustus, he was burnt to ashes. Dust to dust, ashes to ashes, right? We say that at funerals in Christian liturgy. So ashes, cremation, dust, burial. Those are the two fates. I could add water if you want to do the sea again. So we could say perished at sea, went back to the dust, or was cremated and became ashes. Okay, how would that person be raised?
Mm-hmm.
There's no way to talk about resuscitating a corpse, but you
Right.
could talk about bodily appearances, as you're saying. That's
Right.
part of the culture everywhere.
Yeah, I mean, even the pneumatic body, there's this idea that even in the visions of Asclepius, or from using any other deity that has become deified, they're not seeing a flesh and blood person. But they still carry a shape to know that, hey, that vision I had, I know it was Jesus. Well, how do you know it was Jesus? If it's just a ball of light, how can you say you know what it is at all? And it may be in the shape of a light, but in some way they know it's this person, this deity, whether it's Asclepius, a Caesar, Jesus, you name it. I like what you said though, because Steve Mason echoes your sentiment here. And I've actually did an interview. Actually, he's not the only one. There are several scholars who actually back your interpretation on this that I've discussed, that early on it is a pneumatic body. It is not flesh and blood. But isn't ironic to you, James, that we find Paul talking about flesh and blood will not inherit the kingdom, and then Luke comes on talk about Jesus is flesh and bone. It doesn't say blood, but it's flesh and bone. Hold on. Flesh and blood will not. And the next thing you know, you end up getting flesh and bone Jesus.
Yeah.
It's what the heck happened here?
It's to prove that he really appeared. That's the idea. So he eats. And then if you eat, you presumably defecate, right? And, in early Christianity, this problem, I call it the toilet problem of human beings. We are biological animals, right? And we excrete and so forth. So that's the toilet problem. They finally say things in Christian theology. This is 3rd, 4th, 5th century. It's a real conundrum for them that Mary ascends, for example, bodily to heaven. Bodily. Okay. Jesus ascended bodily. It's like bodily means really to them.
Yeah.
Really. Bodily. Don't tell me about a ghost or a spirit. He really did. Well, then somebody, again, pagan critics, but he ate. So, how does that happen? And what they say, believe it or not, is the amount they eat was so perfectly absorbed by the body that they had no need to ever use the toilet, even though they were bodily. And then, have you ever read Augustine? And they argue for a fleshly body, that it has to be the flesh, but somehow it's an incorruptible flesh or something.
Right.
You get into the Christian theologians who are trying to defend this. But if you go back to the early view, now, Derek, I have people who write me all the time, emails, and even in the courses I teach, we get into this, and they go, but Dr. Tabor, when Paul says he saw the Lord, do you think he really saw something, or was that just a vision? Now, let me explain this about what I think Paul saw. I have no idea what Paul saw. I have no idea if it was an apparition, a hallucination, or Jesus Christ sitting at the right hand of God. How would I know that? The only thing I can do as a historian is tell you what Paul said he saw, you see? And he's our only 1st century witness. And a lot of times people, but was it real? They'll say, was it real? How would I know if it was real? I guess if we could interview him, we could critically go into, now, where were you and what was it like? And was it a light, or was it like in the book of Acts, it's a bright light more than the sun that blinds you, and you hear a voice. We don't recognize the voice because Paul didn't know Jesus, presumably, in Acts. And he goes, who are you? He goes, I'm Jesus. Oh, okay, now I know your voice. Well, a voice from heaven, you got voices from heaven all the way through, Jewish and Christian tradition. The bat kol, the rabbis talk about the voice from heaven, from the Most High. What does that imply? So those questions for historians cause us to just say to students and others that listen to our own exegesis of these passages, you're going to have to form your own views of that. But I think what a lot of people are asking is, if I believed in a spiritual resurrection, if you want to use that term, a wind body, not a flesh and blood body like Paul describes. He says, I can't tell you what kind of a body, because God gives the body that he chooses to those that are raised from the dead. And then he describes it, but he doesn't say what kind of a body, other than it's a wind body or a spirit body. But could I believe that and really believe he was raised from the dead? Well, Paul did, apparently, unless he was insincere. I think he probably did believe that. So if you believe it because Paul believed it, that's a decision that you make. But frankly, historians, I think, have to stay out of that. What we can say is what our sources say, but we can't go behind the sources. Like, I don't even know who wrote Mark, but I can talk all day about what I think Mark's view was, which we just did. You see the difference? Now, is that your view? Is that my view? We all have personal views. And I guess people just want me to declare what my view is.
What is your view? That's my view. Tell me, James, I trust you.
Then they can dismiss it. Well, I don't hide my view.
I know,
it's
I'm
in
kidding,
all of my books. I think Jesus was a human being, flesh and blood, had a human father. And I think, like all humans, he died. So whatever happens to the dead, that happened to him. And then I think that people had sightings and experiences that they interpreted as him being enthroned and glorified at the right hand of God. So that's what I believe, individually as a person. But I can't go past that and say, oh, but an apparition could really be him, right? Right, Dr. Tabor, right?
You know what I thought about?
I don't know. I guess you have to check out apparitions through history and see if any of them.
That's what I was going to say.
Were ever verified, but that's not the job of a historian.
Before we get to super chats, just to make the point, like that same question, we have these figures, these ancient figures, especially when this is our sacred texts, our sacred religion, if you will. We have these figures on this like pedestal that if we could interview Paul, and Paul did say, I literally saw him. I know it's true. Like,
but he didn't say, he didn't, remember, he almost said, I didn't see him, because he said, I can't tell you what kind of a body the resurrection body is. So he's sort of saying that I didn't see a shape or anything. Now, did he hear a voice? I think that's the most likely possibility, not because of Acts, but because of when he ascends to paradise in 2 Corinthians 12, 10 through 12. If you read that section, the whole section, start in chapter 10, he talks about, I asked the Lord Jesus and he said to me 3 times. Right. And then he gets like the word. And he talks about people receiving a word of the Lord, including him, about the Last Supper. This I tell you by a word of the Lord, resurrection of the dead, 1 Thessalonians 4. It says, I'm telling you this by a word of the Lord. So Paul thought he heard Jesus. I assume that's right in his mind audible. But as far as the resurrection body, he says, I can't tell you. He says it's sort of like an acorn and an oak tree. Yeah. It's whatever body God gives it, but it's in another realm that we can't really comprehend in our time-space dimension, I think, is what he's trying to say.
I guess what I was just getting at with this, what I was trying to get at was, if you go and interview people today, like, they're not going to walk away trusting and just taking the word of just anyone who's saying they had a vision or a dream or they saw the Lord spoke to them. A lot of Christians even today will look at Christians who say that and they're like, you need to go see a doctor or something. And it's like, but like, we're quick to read this sacred literature and be like, I accept this guy and what he said. And I get it. It's faith. That's a tough nut to crack. But at the end of the day, it's like, again, if you take that view you're talking about, and you don't try to take too much of a stance on this as a historian, you try to go, I think he really was sincere. I think he thought he heard stuff, possibly even saw something, and he's relaying it. I must point people. I feel I'm obligated to mention, look at the countless other cults in the world where their figures also have visions, teach new laws, have experiences, audibly and visibly say they saw things. Joseph Smith, the list can go on, and go, hey, are you really honestly assessing all the data in the world equally? That's my personal thing, is I want to be like, look at the whole panorama of everything that's out there and consider the data and say, why just this one? Why do I only accept this one? And if I admit, well, I got my bias. I was raised in a Christian household. I love the tradition. Okay, cool. But like, I just, if you really just came at it naked without that bias, I don't know how you can land on any one without having a personal experience yourself, or being swayed by someone you find influential, someone who's potentially a mentor or something that comes from that tradition. And that's just my personal perspective at this point in my life. But
so we've both given our perspectives.
We've given our perspective.
And mine is more to evaluate the earliest texts that we have. And would you agree, Derek, assuming that the letters of Paul, at least First Corinthians, let's say, and First Thessalonians, do come from Paul's hand, if we can trust that, would he not be the only eyewitness testimony to what seeing the Lord is? And when you ask him, well, what kind of a body did you see? He says, God knows. I can't explain that, but it will be a body that's glorified, powerful, and immortal, right?
Yeah, I mean, look, as a Christian, when I was deep in church and worship and prayer and meditating, I would have, or even self-concoct in my own mind through my own cultural avenue, which, Paul's within the Jewish kind of Greco-Roman Jewish world. He has this third heaven experience, this kind of stuff. Like, it's not unrealistic that this guy is having some kind of experience. I had them. So I grant that, especially if we can grant that these are his letters. I have no problem with that. I would also add the furniture of what Richard Miller's talking about with the common tropes, that in order for your guy to be known to be in heaven and become a god, you needed to kind of have these eyewitnesses back it up. You kind of needed these missing body tropes. You kind of needed to like have these elements of this kind of Greco-Roman furniture, if I can. You're painting your character in a model that's similar to the well-known deified figures, Alexander the Great, the Caesars. Jesus is kind of in line with some of that stuff. And even Josephus, when he talks about Moses didn't die. He says Moses was taken up. It's like, hold on, man. The Bible says Moses died. Josephus had to have the guy taken up along with those well-known Greco-Roman tropes. So I'm trying to find a way to merge both, James, that there's a real human element of, I tend to use the word superstition, and I know it comes across derogatory for some, but I don't mean it in a derogatory way. I just say humans are prone to believe, and we have deep experiences that we want to attribute to these things, but also couple it with the well-known furniture, if you will, the myth, the legend of the day that signaled your guy was deified.
Yeah, it's sort of what I do, what you do. We have different places from which we come and from which we operate. And I see my task as a historian of religions to expose students and others to that whole range of texts, including the ones we just went over, and try to ask, what is it that the texts are saying and claiming, and who wrote them, and where do they come from? And in the case of Paul, I think you've got the earliest eyewitness account of a first-person human being saying, "I've seen the Lord," and then discussing fully what kind of a body it will be. So it doesn't fit the flesh and bones idea of these later texts, and so.
Maybe we do another video at some point talking about the body, the empty tomb, these kind of things, because I know you have a different take on that. Can we get to the super chats here?
Sure. Yeah.
Because I know that I got to run my kid to the airport here in a bit, and we talked about doing this stream.
Yeah, you go by your time. We can
go
for a bit more if you want. Mm-hmm.
Few super chats. Again, thank you for everybody who's liked the video, shared the video, commented today, joined us, whether you agree, whether you disagree, whether you hate me or you love me. We appreciate you being here, and please consider signing up for Dr. James D. Tabor's course, and you can be joining them this Sunday in a Zoom class and learning and having fun with Dr. Tabor. First super chat. I fish in a tide. Thank you for the super chat, my friend. Is the best evidence for spiritual resurrection the Talpiot tomb and the James ossuary lead lead isotopes match the lead isotopes of the Jesus ossuary, and they both match the lead isotopes from Qumran?
Yeah, this has to do with the whole Talpiot tomb, James ossuary, whether it was once in the Talpiot tomb and the names, and it actually extends it beyond the idea of lead being in the water in various places throughout antiquity. So it takes us off the subject and actually would get back to what you suggested right at the end, that we do more on the so-called empty tomb or tombs and remains in Jerusalem today and what can be said. So I think that just in terms of the question, the lead at Qumran, some have taken to say, well, then the whole movement must somehow be connected to the Dead Sea Scroll movement. But I think lead in the water, because of different kind of geological things as well as different vessels that people used, is a broader subject that I really haven't delved into that much. I've seen reports of this. So,
if I could take a jab at this, based on what I heard you saying today, the Talpiot tomb and James ossuary have zero relation to why you're taking a spiritual resurrection approach. You're just suggesting that whether or not the body was there or missing, you would still have a resurrection. Meaning, if we could have found the body, you could still have the belief that a spiritual immortalization of the character happens. So you could still see, if we found Jesus's body, technically, according to the earliest idea of resurrection, this has nothing to do with Talpiot tomb. It's just, you could see his dead corpse and still say, I had an experience, a vision, that he has become deified and he is resurrected in some way or taken up. So that was your initial point, is that the flesh has nothing to do with it.
The core question we're discussing today would work with someone who thought Jesus was left on the cross and rotted, or that he was buried in a ditch, or that he was thrown into a common burial, or he was given an honorary, I shouldn't say an honorary, he was given an honorable burial by his family, eventually with Joseph of Arimathea taking the body and so forth. None of that would be relevant to any of this, because any of those could be true and you could still have the kind of spiritual body and believe in resurrection. So it's not directly relevant, but the lead has to do with whether bones absorb lead according to water and diet and so forth, and whether that could somehow make a connection with Qumran. So, but even if it did, I don't think it would say it was Jesus of Nazareth necessarily. It could be some other Jesus at Qumran and so forth.
Right. Bruh Jesus, thank you for the super chat. Are there any scholars who believe it's allegory? I think John Dominic Crossan, in a way, believes that the resurrection is kind of symbolic of, or allegory.
I wouldn't think that he would deny, though, that early followers of Jesus, starting with Paul as our first witness, claim to have seen things, sightings of Jesus. So if you're reading the entire text as an allegory is a tricky word, right? Because usually it's used in literary sense. For the one time it's used in the New Testament, I think, is by Paul when he says, well, Mount Sinai and Hagar are allegorical stories about bondage and slavery and so forth. And what that means is, if I literally go to the Hagar story, it's not about Jews and Gentiles and whether they should keep the law once Christ came, but I could use it as an allegory that a slave woman brought slave children forth, and a free woman, Sarah, brought Isaac forth. And he's making a very convoluted argument that we cover in the course. So that's kind of like us. You know, you Gentiles are free. You're born of the spiritual Isaac by allegory. And those Jews who claim to be from Isaac are really from a slave woman because they're in slavery to the Torah. Allegories get convoluted like that. So I'm not sure if Jesus means allegory like that. If I were guessing, because I get this question often, it would mean more, is it used in some non-literal symbolic way that Jesus is raised? And I don't think so in the Hellenistic world. Some people have listened to Robin Faith Walsh's talking about the cosmos recently at Bart Ehrman's conference, and she makes it clear these aren't allegories for people. Like the moon is up there and there are levels of heaven that the dead go through and so forth. And Paul talks about the third heaven and entering paradise. I don't think these are allegories for them. In their cosmos, in their constructed worldview, they can have visionary experiences that actually correspond to their understanding of the 7 planetary spheres and so forth, the lowest being the moon. And I think that was the way they looked up at the vastness of the universe above them. So I hope that helped. I don't know.
Yeah. Doc Pluromanaut, thank you for the super chat. Good to see you here. Can we gain a red thread of continuity between Jesus's early followers and Josephus's references to resurrection, or a migration of souls, striking Pythagorean tones to gospel readers? Diodorus Siculus.
Great question, and I've got a long answer to it that I can give you in 1 second. I wrote a major article on this very question, Doc. If you go to jamestabor.com and look under, there are categories at the top of my blog, and one is my published papers, publications and papers. Derek can go find it.
Yep.
And it's called Josephus's Idea of Moses's Ascent to Heaven. I sent it to you recently, Derek, because you were talking about all this.
Here,
and what he does is take resurrection of the dead, which literally in Jewish thought, no, it would be go up to the top, and go to publications and papers. Click on that. There you go. And then scroll down.
Oh.
You might, you'll have to scroll down. You could just do a page search now. If you just hit Control Find and put Josephus, and there you'll get it.
Returning to Divinity. Portrayal
there it is. So you can click on that and get the article. There it is, free. And I think that will answer your question. I give all the parallels, and I talk about what he says about Enoch, Elijah, and Moses. And this is going to get back to the Transfiguration.
Right.
Is they return to the divinity. And that implies transmigration. Notice, return to the divinity. But in Jesus' case, look, what does the Gospel of Peter say? He went back from thence, or from whence he had come, right?
Right.
Had been sent. So that's returning to the divinity. So when these figures disappear, Derek mentioned Moses earlier, and then you've got the traditions of Enoch and Elijah. Also, Enoch walked with God and he was not, for God took him, and so forth. So this is a very dense academic article. You can see all the footnotes there, but take a look at that and then write me an email, Doc, if you have more questions.
I shared the link. Make sure you check it out. I really appreciate that, Doc. Next super chat. I fish in a tie. Who is the boy in Codex Babiensis? Jesus' son?
I think I know who Fish in a Tie is now, but I'm not going to reveal his secret identity because he and I have discussed the lead isotopes. He's also discussed that is a strange one. This is endings of Mark, and you're tempted to think that it's the boy who ran away naked or something like that in the garden. Isn't that, I think it's the Mark passage. I haven't looked at it lately, but
yeah, I haven't looked at this particular codex.
But in terms of Jesus's son, the only reference I know about a son of Jesus in the Talpiot tomb, at least, there is a Jude, son of Jesus. But other than that, some people have read John 20, mother, behold your son, son, behold your mother, as actually Jesus talking to Mary Magdalene. I think Simca Jacobovicius thought this, said, consider this, that it doesn't say his mother in Greek. When it says, and Jesus saw his mother, it doesn't say his mother, it says the mother. Jesus saw the mother. And Mary Magdalene's there too, and said, mother, you mother, behold your son, son, behold your mother. I think it's a stretch. I think it is referring to Mary, the mother of Jesus, and it's talking about James, not John, the fisherman, but the beloved disciple James, who takes charge of the family when Jesus dies. It's a Jewish handover from the eldest son to the next in line. I think that makes the most sense contextually. Not in John, maybe, but where that comes from. But it doesn't make sense for me to fit Mary Magdalene and her son, if she had a son with Jesus, which people have argued, because it says that disciple took her into his home as if, and I think that fits James more, the eldest son taking care of the mother for the family. Whereas the kid, the boy, is going to take care of a mother. I think if anything, it'd be the other way around. So that would be my comment on that idea. It is interesting.
Yeah. Sai Ali, thank you so much. I hope I pronounced that properly. Are the Dead Sea Scrolls and the LXX fluid diverse and not uncorrupted word? That
might be talking about Hebrew Bible in general then, because neither of them quote the New Testament.
This sounds like a Muslim question, though, if you think about it, because it's like saying, is their text corrupted?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
You've done enough shows on the Quran and its origins that I can always get out of that by saying it's not my field of expertise, but I look to those who work on it. But I would say that no copies of any Bibles, meaning Hebrew Bible, where you would use mainly the Leningrad Codex or the Masoretic text, which is a rabbinic compilation from the Middle Ages, or the Septuagint or Dead Sea Scroll, I don't particularly like corrupt, because that implies a theological approach, but they are interpolated, overwritten, they have insertions, they have alternative variants and versions, and that would be all copies of all texts. In this case, if you're talking about Dead Sea Scrolls, for sure, LLX for sure, and any text of the Hebrew Bible as well. You have to include that as well. In fact, the Masoretic text even admits in the margins where they've changed things, and they put the things that they've taken out and keep a record of it. There are hundreds of emendations that they make.
But isn't this a
for
sign
theological reasons? So,
wouldn't you agree, though, that this is kind of a sign about this whole uncorrupted or perfect word? Is this extremely anachronistic idea that they weren't flexible and, as it says, fluid, diverse? That was the tradition, that it was willing and capable to be malleable to new ideas, and it rolled. It eventually becomes fixed, but it doesn't seem, from what I can tell early on, that anyone was dogmatic to the jot and tittle of everything being perfect and that was not a thing till later, it seems. And by the
Oh, they're
time you get
different.
Islam,
Yeah, everyone, the Septuagint, if you look at the critical edition, look at the footnotes, Ralph's, and you'll see on every page hundreds of variants according to different manuscripts and copies of the Septuagint. Same with the Hebrew Bible, whether it's Dead Sea Scrolls or Septuagint readings. The same with the New Testament. So there are layers, there are interpolations, there are variant readings, there are sources, and so forth. In our Gospels, I think there are embedded sources. Well, I know one for sure. Matthew uses Mark as his narrative source. I can show you that word for word.
yeah,
What he does as he goes through, and he's editing it. So now we have a version of the life of Jesus that is a secondary version. And then you have a third version in Luke, and a fourth in John, and a fifth in other Gospels that begin to really go crazy with infancy Gospels and the Proto-Evangelium. And by then you're just making stuff up right and left, so.
Thank you so much for that super chat. Damon, thank you for the super sticker. Appreciate you being here and showing love. Tom Kazel, forgive me if I butchered the last name there, gifted 1 Myth Vision podcast membership. Thank you so much for gifting the podcast membership. We obviously want to grow our family here, and I want to start doing more streams. If you become a member, you get a special little symbol next to your name, which means you won't resurrect in the same flesh and blood when you die, but you will be taken up. So I can promise that.
But it's a myth. Your vision is a myth, though. So
yes,
I wouldn't. Exactly. I'm not sure that that's worth the money.
Look, it's worth it. Tabor's just trying to deter you to his kingdom. Don't go to his kingdom. No, I'm just kidding. Seriously, thank you for becoming a member. John Gear, Dr. Tabor takes the controversial to some position that Jesus pooped.
I wonder if he means after the resurrection. So,
do you after you like according to how do you explain? Right?
If he's a flesh and blood body, and it has to be a flesh and blood body, and he eats, then of course he would defecate and urinate. Urine would come very quickly, just drinking a glass of water, right? Within a few hours. I don't know really what apologists like Gary Habermas would say. If he's there 40 days, and notice in Acts it says, you can translate it as he was eating among them for 40 days. Look at Acts chapter 1.
Right. What's he doing?
Look at the reading. It literally is kind of like traded salt among them, meaning it's an expression for eating. So Luke, Acts, whoever wrote Acts, the author of Luke, we think is this, that's controversial, but I would go with the same author, but it doesn't matter. The author of Acts in chapter 1, verse 4, is implying that for 40 days after Jesus was raised, he ate with his disciples. Yes, something has to go with that food. But, I don't find it disrespectful to talk about biological functions, but I do think that Paul would say you have no idea what resurrection is if someone was interested in that. So I think we've answered that. And I think Mark would also say, I told you he was taken up. He was taken up, as he said, and as you saw in Mark 9. So why are you asking such a question?
Thank you so much for that. Ronan of Stag, thank you for the super chat. Happy holidays, everyone. And here's to a hopefully decent new year. Keep fighting the good fight. Knowledge is power. Thank you.
So the good fight is our continual quest, as my friend Robert Kuhn says, to get closer to the truth. I love the phrase. Or my teacher, Jonathan Smith, even if we exaggerate, let's do it in the direction of the truth as we see it. Because sometimes we overstate our cases. So if I overstated it, was it in the direction of the truth? And the truth would be, I think, the historical truth is that the earliest Christian view of resurrection was being taken to heaven and becoming a life-giving spirit. Nothing to do with the flesh and blood body. And one can believe that. Paul believed it. So anyone today can believe it. But what apologists often do is say, no. That could be an apparition. Let me show you the accounts where people saw and ate with him, and therefore it couldn't be a vision, right? And then you read the one in Luke where their eyes are opened, and then they go, it's Jesus. So we're kind of playing back and forth, as you said, between the two realms.
Thank you. I fish in a tie again. Thanks for the super chat, my friend. To be clear, did the resurrected Jesus appear to his followers? So, James, you want to answer that?
I got to add ... according to whom and what account. So I would go at the earliest record, Paul. He did meet the apostles, certainly Peter and James, he mentions by name, and John in Galatians. He stayed with Peter 2 weeks. He stayed with James. And my guess is they're comparing visionary experiences. Now, when you say, did he do it? It's not a question historians can answer. What we can answer is, what is our earliest account? 1 Corinthians 15. 1 Thessalonians 4 is implied. It's a little bit earlier. But 1 Corinthians 15 is early enough. It's 54 CE, we think. And so that witness says, yes, I saw him. So you then have to make a decision if you want to go further than that. I can't see a way to go further than that in terms of if you're asking me as a historian. So to be clear, did he appear to his followers? According to whom? Paul? Yes, he did. He appeared to his followers, including James. We don't have an account of that, but Paul says he heard it from James.
So I would just add my personal, I'd almost reverse the question and say, to be clear, did the resurrected Jesus appear to his followers? Did Asclepius appear to his devotees in the temple? Did Romulus actually appear to Proculus Julius? Did the Caesars appear to people on Roman roads? The list goes on and on in terms of appearances all throughout history. And you just reverse the question and ask the same question to any and every eyewitness appearance claim of the divine appearing to them in some way. And if you don't answer yes to those, I would ask you why, if you're going to say yes to this, especially when you can't go back and actually be able to tangibly either experience it yourself or, I have huge red flags on how are we treating other eyewitness claims that are all around. So that's my personal take. I would reverse it and just say, why are we only doing this one and not going to the rest?
But even then, Derek, you have to read those individual accounts, what author wrote them, and talk about, are they claiming to have seen it, or is it a third-person account of what someone said? You would still do the same sorting through, and if there are multiple accounts, you could then do the kind of comparison analysis that we did today.
Right. That's a great point. Like, is there a first-person text of an eyewitness claimant of something in antiquity about some figure? Does that make it more believable that a person says, I saw versus this person claimed to see? To me, it doesn't make it more believable because I'm already coming with my own package of saying I'm not accepting the claims of these miraculous things as much as I wouldn't accept these. You could say you saw it. That doesn't make it more believable than someone said they said you saw it or something to me at least.
Well, I think I've told you before, as a professor for years, I felt it was important for me. I don't make judgments on people's spiritual experiences. And I think you have the same position, Derek. If people want to tell me things they've seen or experienced, people write me things all the time. I don't make any kind of judgment on that. I don't think I can, unless it approaches such craziness as Pat Robertson claiming that a woman just wrote in, she had her teeth removed the day before, and the Lord put a whole new set of permanent teeth inner gums in a second, and a gold cross filling. I don't know why you need a filling, but I guess for decoration on each one of the molars. Now, molars, rather.
Yeah.
I somehow didn't believe that, so I made a judgment on that. I said that didn't happen. Or if you said an elephant flew from New York to London last night and you saw it land. So sometimes things do get so far-fetched that most of us would separate that. But if somebody tells me, look, I had this experience and Jesus appeared, many people have told me that in my room, I saw him, I heard him, it was him.
I've heard it too. Yeah.
I don't have anything I can really say about that other than if 100 years from now, I had your testimony, I could say, so-and-so claim to have had this experience and it was really true and they were utterly convinced by it. That would be the historian's take on it.
Right.
So we could say, did Abraham Lincoln in any of his letters ever claim to have any kind of vision? That would be, I don't know if he did, but let's say he did. And then I would have the letter where he said it, but that's what I would talk about. I'd say, yeah, here's a letter Abraham Lincoln wrote, and he said he had a vision of this or that. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So that's what I would discuss, is the letter and the claim, not, do you think Abraham Lincoln really had that experience? You see where the difference?
I do.
Hope it's clear. I've said it about 10 times.
Well, thinking of the Branch Davidians, like, did he claim any visions in particular?
Absolutely.
Okay, so do you think he was sincere?
I actually do in his case, yes.
Okay, well, people think that about Joseph Smith. People think that about Muhammad. I guess what I'm getting at is, like, it's the outsider test of faith kind of thing. It's like backing up and going, why are we only granting this guy? But like the other people are sincerely saying that they're having these things too. For me, and I know this is my bias kicking in, but to me, this seems to be a very well understood human phenomena. This is like a natural human thing that we do. This doesn't bring the truth of an ontological claim. This shows that this is expected amongst humans to do these things, to say these things, and to experience these things. I don't think this proves the validity of any of the claims of the miraculous. This proves the validity of human, just how human we are and what humans do. Because if it isn't, why do we have to be like, well, I believe the Branch Davidians, but I don't accept Mormonism. Oh, but I don't accept Mormonism. I accept Muhammad. Oh, I don't accept Muhammad. I accept,
right.
Paul, the apostle.
So you and I have different roles, really. The role you've taken upon yourself and the role I've taken. And mine is to try to explain, because of training in texts and languages, what a given text might say, when it was dated, how it intersects with other evidence and other materials and so forth. So, people ask me about UFO, not just sightings, but the many testimonies, one of which comes from a very, very close friend of mine who says he was taken up into a ship and examined, all these stories you hear. And I could joke about it and say, why do they have such an interest in human genitals? Because you almost always had, they probe my different orifices, and you go like, ooh, that's weird. But I have no expertise in judging those kinds of things. So
Thank you so much.
We have to go back to our own personal experience on that level, and that's what you're actually reflecting on in your case.
I know how sincere I was. I know how much I really, really believed it, James. I'm not trying to discredit. I meant it. That's why I can also confidently feel like I'm on the right track of fairly assessing this material, not trying to discredit the experience. The experience was a real experience, but the truth claim of its reality, in the sense that that's where I would go, okay, seems more like humans have experiences versus what's really the case of what's actually happening, at two different things to me. Deconstruction Zone, thank you for the super chat. Go subscribe to Deconstruction Zone. I'm actually going to be having conversations with him soon, and very knowledgeable. He says, do you think Jesus or gospel authors thought he was the original fulfillment of Daniel 9, or a second fulfillment, like Josephus said 70 AD was, Antiquities 10:11-7.
So he's talking about the 70 weeks prophecy, I take it, at the end of that chapter, maybe?
I would
Yeah,
imagine.
I'm sure that's it. Yeah. I do think that in my Jesus and the Dead Sea Scroll course, so again, I'm pitching a course, but I would really recommend it because we spend considerable time talking about the 70 weeks prophecy and how it was interpreted in the late Second Temple period as a sliding final 10 Jubilee period and when it would culminate. And Josephus, of course, has his own stretched out interpretation because he's taking it all the way down. The problem with this prophecy is it will finally break down because 10 Jubilees is 490 years. So wherever, it's like a sliding scale like this, right? So you say, well, it began here, and so the fulfillment has to be here. And then in the Dead Sea Scroll group, they realized that didn't happen by the death of the teacher and so forth. And Jerusalem wasn't destroyed by a final evil ruler and so forth. And so they say in Habakkuk, as they interpret Habakkuk, the vision is true. If it tarries, wait for it, it will surely come. It hasn't failed. And that tended to be the move. So then by the time you get to the first century, you can see people are making it come out to the time of Jesus. Evangelical Christians do that. But what they do finally to make it relevant is to put a gap in it. So as you know, the dispensationalists, the Darbyites say that the final 7 years is still to come, but the first 483 led right up to Jesus and his death in usually the year 30 or 33, they put it. If you want to bring up Antiquities 10, if you have time, we can look at that. But
well,
it has to do, Josephus is convinced himself that everything that happened to Jerusalem was actually prophesied. And he does talk about an obscure oracle in our writings. This is in actually Jewish War, book 6. And he said that we misinterpreted this because the one to come was Vespasian, who became the emperor. And we thought it was our own Redeemer. So he actually tells the Emperor Vespasian in the Jewish War, you're prophesied in Daniel 9. So, but the Antiquities passage, it's paragraph 276 of book 10. I could pull it up, but you can probably do it electronically.
Do you want me to pull it up?
It's up to you.
Is this the one where he ends up giving credit to Vespasian and disagrees with the idea that it was won from their own land?
No, that would be, unless he's repeating it again. The primary passage is Jewish Wars, book 6, where he says that everything that happened was prophesied in an obscure oracle, and he's referring to Daniel 9.
Yeah, when therefore those that had intended thus to destroy Daniel by treachery, here, I'll share the screen. If you want me to, I'm looking right now at Perseus Tufts. And by the way, everybody subscribe to Deconstruction Zone in spite of Chris Lestrange, fanboy of Jay Dyer. It seems like we need to just go subscribe to our friend and make these other people so happy. All right, go ahead.
We'll probably have to look at that more closely.
Let me zoom in.
See, go on down. You have to go on down to keep going down. I don't see the reference to 70, so you got to keep going.
Daniel conversed with God.
Oh, Daniel, okay, conversed with God. It sounds like he's saying the same thing that he does say. He does think 70 is a fulfillment of
Daniel was to them
Daniel.
a prophet of good things, and this to a degree that by the agreeable nature of his predictions, he procured the goodwill of all men, and by accomplishment of them, he procured the belief of their truth and the opinion of a sort of divinity
keep
for
going
himself.
down and see if we get to Vespasian. You got all the horns and the he-goat. Keep going. There we go.
Okay.
All the way down. He's going through Daniel.
There's
11 here.
3 years.
Okay, Antiochus Epiphanes. He's in chapter 11 here, not chapter 9. I haven't looked at it, so it's not something we can easily do right now.
Yeah,
and now he's going on to
something else.
Other passages. But he does, clearly he's going through Daniel 11 here and taking it down to Antiochus and trying to say it was fulfilled.
Oh, he says, yeah. He mentions Antiochus in the last section. Sorry, I wasn't paying attention to the chat here.
Yeah, but Antiochus is not... he thinks that Vespasian was the ruler who was to come in Daniel 9.
Yeah.
But Daniel 11, yes, he would think that's Antiochus.
Yeah, I'm trying to wrap my head around like just the question.
But the principle here is that prophecy slides until finally it has to break. You can't make 490 years start with the rebuilding of the walls of Jerusalem and go for thousands of years unless you put a gap. If you put a gap, it's fail-safe. I do have a series on YouTube called Bible Prophecy, and I do discuss this, the whole book of Daniel, so you can look at that. And I'm going to look at your website under Derek's recommendation. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Travis. And by the way, I posted it in the comments, so go subscribe to his channel. If you do, Angel gets its wings. So, Travis, thank you so much, Travis, for being here. Longtime viewer. Why don't we spend more time studying the cargo cult religion to understand how Christians fool themselves the same ways? John from Jesus Christ.
Yeah, well, each of us has our own area of expertise, but yes, I would recommend the Oxford Handbook of Millenarianism, or I think it's just called the Oxford Handbook of the Millennium. And there you'll find essays. I wrote the one on Judeo-Christians, Jews and Christians, because that's my field. But you'll find millenarian interpretations worldwide from antiquity to the present, including somebody like David Korsh that was more biblically based. And cargo cults are utterly fascinating, and they have been studied extensively with these very things in mind. So, Travis, I'm glad you're onto that.
Oh.
And for those who aren't, I would recommend that Oxford Encyclopedia of the Millennium, because it covers worldwide. That's what you need. Polynesian island myths, African myths, Asian myths, as well as Western, Middle Ages, and so forth.
Hey, James, I found what he was talking about, just to bring that up. I had to look up in the chat. Yeah. And indeed, it came to pass that our nation suffered these things under Antiochus Epiphanes, according to Daniel's vision and what he wrote many years before they came to pass. So Doug is suggesting maybe Josephus is saying the fulfillment happened under Antiochus Epiphanes. I don't know. Am I correct?
Formally, no, what he's saying, this is not Daniel 9, this is Daniel 11, but they connect, remember. And it's talking about Antiochus Epiphanes for sure, but then it says the final end is yet for the time appointed, and then it talks about another ruler who's going to come, and Josephus is saying we didn't realize that actually referred then to the Romans coming.
Okay.
So he's stretching it out into the Roman period. Yes.
Okay. Sorry, I wanted to make sure it clarified. All right. A few more here, and then we'll wrap things up. Right here, Travis again says, special pleading is good and honest because... Thank you for the super chat.
We should... I guess we should try to avoid it if it's done in a undisciplined way. Depends on what you mean by special pleading, I guess. How would Travis define it, do you think?
It's probably like me.
We usually say that you're privileging or giving more weight to something rather than something else for prejudicial reasons. It's special pleading.
Yeah. Like,
so if I hear that Pat Robertson got this testimony about the woman and her dentures, then I'm going to believe it, because Pat Robertson certainly would not put forth something that didn't happen. Right. He would check out these healing miracles.
Exactly.
And I hope most people would say, well, that's kind of special pleading, I think, because I'm being silly here, but that account is patently ridiculous. And it didn't happen. Nobody got dentures, full permanent teeth put in, and called the dentist and said, forget those dentures. I got my permanent teeth back, and they even have a gold cross in them.
Yeah, so it's kind of this idea, right? All religions are naturally invented by imaginative animals except for Jesus. And I think that's the point. Like, Jesus really was born divinely through a virgin birth. Jesus really did walk on water. Jesus really did die and rise again. Jesus was the one who ascended to heaven. The births of the other figures never happened. The walking on water, it's like all of those never happened. By the way, visions and experiences of seeing that deified figure afterwards, Paul's happened. We can trust it. We believe it. We don't accept Asclepius. We don't accept any of the Caesars. We don't accept Sabbatai Zevi. We don't accept, anyone else but ours. And
well, the reason, Derek, the reason for that is all these other accounts that you're naming came hundreds of years after, written by authors who could not possibly have any eyewitness contact. Whereas,
well, no, we have contemporaneous Roman imperial propaganda.
Yeah, that's true, but they're probably exaggerating. But generally, life of Alexander and so forth, it's not the same.
Why can't we say that?
I would like that, because then I'd say, well, thanks for batting it back to my field, because I do want to look at those early accounts from the first 100 years of the movement. And guess what they say? They don't say that a corpse came out and became alive and ate and drank. That's what we did this whole program for.
Exactly.
Anyway, we come full circle. So
I've heard it posed, even Delcy Allison's. This is the final question I have, and we'll leave, is this. I've heard that some scholars have actually considered the fact that what if Paul was also, we're willing to say the Roman imperial cult propagandistically invented eyewitnesses claiming the Caesars appeared to them on roads, swearing on oath that they saw him on roads. Why do we not trust that account? But we can go to Paul and we just blindly trust that he's not inventing something as a cult leader similar to Joseph Smith or Muhammad or anyone else. And I think that's a valid thing that needs to be laid out on the table, even if one goes, well, I think he's just superstitious and hallucinating or whatever. That's granted as an option. Why isn't that an option too? If there's propaganda in the Roman imperial cult doing eyewitness stuff, why aren't we granting that with Paul?
Remember, deluded people can be very sincere.
True. So it could be both, right?
It just forms a full circle. You say, well, maybe he's deluded, but if he believes, then he can be sincere and be deluded, and you're just you're going in circles. So.
Yeah. Look, we love you, James. I'm so glad you said, look, let's talk about this. Let's go in depth again to plug the course, as I'm going to pop this thing up here so everybody knows. Tell us about the course. Why should people sign up? And we'll wrap things up.
Okay. I enjoyed it. I hope everybody has a great weekend. So
get the course.
Take care.
Get the course if you want to go to heaven. I mean, James is promising everlasting life. Not flesh and blood everlasting life, but like even better stuff made of the star material, that kind of body, celestial bodies, right?
I just read the texts as best I can in their historical context. So, right.
Two more popped in here, James. So first one is, do you think that Paul's theology evolved during the writing of his letters?
Within the seven, very little. If he had anything to do with Colossians and Ephesians, yes, but I don't think he wrote those. I think some of his material is in them, and if you go beyond that, Second Thessalonians is up for grabs. However, did he evolve at all? The best evidence would be Philippians, where he's in prison somewhere, and I think he might be thinking that he perhaps will not live to see the final end after all. Maybe he'll be martyred, maybe he'll be killed. But then he said, but he almost acts like he might be making a decision. I can't decide what would be better. But basically, I think I'll probably stay for a while. But what I would really like to know, stop scamming man, is what if he wasn't executed by Nero in 68? I don't think he was. I don't think there's any evidence of that early. Clement of Alexandria is our earliest witness to Paul being imprisoned after the book of Acts. And he says that he was released and went to Spain and preached east and west, and later suffered death under authorities, but I think it would have said Nero if it was Nero. And he's in Rome. He's the Bishop of Rome, right? We usually date it at 96, which is pretty damn early. Mm-hmm. And he doesn't say, and of course we have right here in town the tombs of the beloved apostles, Peter and Paul. He doesn't say that at all. And so I think about this. Paul survived, came back to the land of Israel after 70. Then would he have evolved his theology? Would he have finally said, if it tarries, wait for it, it will surely come? Or might he have come up with other ways of handling what we call the cognitive dissonance that he would have experienced? And there we get into a future course, Derek, when prophecy fails.
That's
what
going
have
to be
people
fun.
done through the ages in the Judeo-Christian tradition when their expectations that were so certain did not come about, and then things just moved on down to further interpretations, right down to Friday morning, December 27th, 2024. You can go on YouTube right now and type in, "Are we in the end time?" And watch out, because your memory probably will max out on your computer with all the hits you'll get.
And then the last one is clearly jabbing me, of course, here. I fish in a tie. Dr. Tabor, I feel Derek is using you to attack Christianity. Can I say what I think and then have you say whatever you want here, just in light of this? I am approaching Christianity like I would any and every cult belief system, whether it is Greco-Roman mythology, Mesopotamian, Egyptian lore, Joseph Smith, Muhammad. It does not matter what it is. I want to get to the bottom of it. And I feel that this super chat is reflecting more about the super chatters' sensitivities to the faith than it is reflecting my antagonism for just outright treating and equally wanting to assess this material like anything else. It is a living religion, so there's going to be sensitivities around it. But if I'm communicating with you and I'm the one bringing forward Richard C. Miller's idea, or someone else who says, why should we take Paul's word for it when we don't take the imperial cult? That seems like an attack to someone who believes Paul or believes in Christianity. I don't need to go by those rules. And I'm not doing it because I want to. I'm doing it because I honestly want to know, how can I understand these things? Because I don't think this is true. This is my position. But I also don't think those are true in the literal sense. Like, maybe people have experiences.
Yeah.
But like, I'm not trying to use you to attack Christianity, but I am against apologetics, James. I am open and upfront about my chip on my shoulder that apologetics is just dishonest, I feel, approaching this material, because it's not going to use the same tools and approach this stuff like other scholarly methods would any of this material. That's my vent in defense of myself. And I fish in a tie. I'm sorry if you felt offended, but I'm not going to change me trying to understand this material.
So here's my response would be that I interview with lots of people from all perspectives, Muslims. I've had several interviews with Muslim scholars, skeptics, atheists, different people. As long as they want to talk about what I have expertise in, which is Christian origins, ancient Greco-Roman religions, and so forth. So I'm glad to share. It doesn't mean that I would necessarily share the views of this or that host or person that asked me on. And in this case, the topic was very specific, and I think we covered it. And that is, very simply put, do our earliest accounts of Jesus being raised from the dead lend themselves to a resuscitated corpse idea, eating and drinking and running around Jerusalem during that first Easter week, or what I think is a prior view and an earlier view? That is our earliest account, and that's what we covered. So everything else is extraneous in that sense. And also the use of the word Christianity is so multi-laden with so many definitions to people, from the Nicene Creed to the Judeo-Christian Ebionites that I'm rather fond of. Yeah. And they didn't think much of Paul at all, but that could be seen as attacking Christianity as well. So,
or even the,
and when I say I'm fond of them, I think they represent a strand of Jamesian, the brother of Jesus, of Jamesian tradition that was essentially blotted out and forgotten and marginalized. And if you want to get a taste of that, read the Q document on my website, unadorned, uncommented on, just the text of the double tradition of Matthew and Luke from Luke, and read the letter attributed to James and ask yourself, did I read anything Christian in these two early texts? One reconstructed, one is in the New Testament. So yeah. So I try to go as early as possible when I do. It's called Christian Origins. So I'm real interested in the first accounts that we have, just to know how things then developed. And that's, I see that as mostly what we've done today. We could have veered off into other things, but Derek is commenting on broader perspectives about the whole history of religions. So, okay.
Thank you so much for the super chat. I fish in a tie. I appreciate it. I only made the remark about that because I saw earlier in a non-super chat by the same gentleman that I was bringing up mythicism because I brought up Richard C. Miller. Richard C. Miller's not a mythicist, number one. Whether he was or wasn't doesn't matter, but he wasn't even bringing up, he doesn't talk about mythicism. He talks about this common Greco-Roman trope of eyewitness stuff that plays a part in that Roman imperial propaganda. I call it propaganda because, you know, I think that they did this in order to glorify their emperor and say he became a god. It was part of the thing. And the Senate could damn you too. So there's all that fun stuff. But James, thank you for your time. I'm going to get my son to the airport here, and people sign up for the course. Sign up for the course. Let us know you appreciate James Tabor by taking his course on Paul. And thank you, James.
So we'll see everybody who's in the course on Sunday. And we'll talk about Paul and the law, the Torah. What does he really say about it? Did he leave his Judaism? Did he adapt it? It's a big question among scholars today. The wind is blowing strongly in a certain direction, and I'm trying to go the other way, and it's pretty tough. But we'll talk about that on Sunday. Take care.
Thank you. Have a good one, everybody.
Son, do you want to know what the truth is? After this, there's no turning back. You take the blue pill and you wake up in your bed and believe whatever you want to. You take the red pill and you stay in Wonderland, and I show you just how deep the rabbit hole goes. Remember, all I'm offering is the truth, nothing more.